Hey everyone, my name's Derrick Ivey. I'm a board certified clinical hypnotherapist, researcher, and intuitive. I'm here today to speak on how I healed my own obsessive compulsive disorder, just things about that in general, and how hopefully it will have some real good insight, hope, and tools for you if this is something that you or someone that you love navigates. So feel free to share this video out with all of your friends who might benefit from this. Maybe they suffer from OCD, maybe something that you deal with, but we're here for you. So my OCD was not early on very apparent. It was I was always different. I was always a weird kid. I was a very, very weird child, and which you could probably imagine. And now I embrace my weirdness, but back then I always felt like I didn't quite fit in with everyone else. Like I was just a little bit more obsessive than everyone else, even from a really young age. Like I would obsess over music, over soda, over just whatever it was. And I've always been a really, really intense person where if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it all the way or not at all. So growing up, what I noticed about myself looking back now is I was always so driven, but to the point that I was obsessive. And it was it was weird at the time, like because I would care so much about something and then the next day I wouldn't care about it anymore because I had already mastered it in my brain. But just the way I was wired was so much different than everyone around me at that time. And I learned later that my OCD in adulthood was very much a result of different factors in my environment as well as my genetics and the way I was wired. But it definitely caused a lot of really debilitating issues for me before I healed this in myself. So I know there's more people out there who are suffering with this, so I want to make this video just to let you know you're not alone. You are totally not alone. There's help out there, there's support out there, there's other people who have went through the same feelings, the same rituals, all of these things that you go through, and there is hope to heal it. And that is my main message is that there is totally, totally hope to heal this in your life. So growing up, I didn't actually know anything was wrong with me. I always felt a little bit different. I always felt a little bit more extreme, a little bit more excessive than everyone else around me. But I didn't see it as something that was inherently wrong with me. And that's a good thing because there really wasn't anything inherently wrong with me, but having this insight about OCD now totally gives me perspective and lights the way for healing of that, right? So I didn't notice that there was a really huge problem with my OCD until I was probably in my mid 20s. I think I was about 24 years old when I realized like this is very, very debilitating and it's really starting to affect my life and I need to get help for this and I need to heal it. So, and that amid many other issues in life and addiction, which also played into the OCD because whenever I would drink alcohol or do street drugs, it just totally took that edge off where I didn't have to participate in all of these rituals that I usually participated in because of my OCD. So the way that this manifested for me was starting in my late teens. I think I was 19 years old when this OCD became a really debilitating animal. And I was 19, I had my own apartment. This was the first time that I was really on my own and apart from my family. And that's when it was very, very noticeable. And you're going to hear later in the video the connection between that. But it was really noticeable when I was outside of that family environment. And it makes sense when I tell you why later in the video. So, what that looked like for me in my late teens and my early 20s with OCD was I was a very much a checking OCD person. Like my OCD centered around checking things over and over and over again and not believing myself that and not trusting myself. And OCD is considered it's called the doubting disorder. I think it's been called that. And that resonates with me as someone who has had OCD come through my energy field, and I've played out all of those patterns and healed through them. That identifies I identify with that one the most because it really it was a terrorizing doubt. And I want to talk about this because so many times, how many times in your own life have you been around someone and they're joking around that they have OCD? It's probably, I hear it all throughout the year. It's really, really common. And that's not OCD if you just like having your house clean and you like having things organized. That's part of your personality. But what OCD is this really nagging doubt that becomes debilitating, and the person usually participates in rituals to offset that doubt and to feel better. So it's not as light as a lot of people like to joke around as it being. It really does cause people a lot of pain and it keeps people stuck. And that was the case for me when I was in my active OCD manifestation. So OCD highly, highly impacted my quality of life. I would be late to work, or I would have to get up a lot earlier than I actually needed to get ready and get showered and get my lunch ready and stuff to go to work because I knew that a lot of that time would have to be devoted to checking and doing my rituals. And that's what it was like for me. I spent 30 to 45 minutes every day checking to make sure that I turned the stove off, checking to make sure that my coffee pot was off, checking to make sure that my door was locked in my house, all this stuff. And yeah, and another way that it manifested was when I was driving and I would hit a bump in my car, I would automatically assume, oh my God, I just hit someone. So I would usually have to turn around and go back to where I was to make sure that there was nothing there that I hit that I was going to get in trouble for. So it's very, very exhausting. And so you might be wondering, what would make you really feel this need to check things over and over again? Like, wouldn't it be good enough just to check it another time and be like, "Okay, we're good." Well, for most people, absolutely, that would be enough, but for someone with OCD, it's not so easy, it's not so cut and dry, and it's not so simple, and those rituals that people with OCD participate in, that is a manifestation of a very deep hole in the soul, as I like to call it. And a hole in the soul, that can be just so many different manifestations of what that would look like in your external reality. And if you know me, you know that I'm in recovery from alcohol and drugs. And that was my addiction was from the same empty place inside of me that my OCD and rituals were a part of. So it was all a manifestation of trying to find what fit inside of this hole in the soul. So that's how my life was. It was basically these little windows and glimmers of good things in life. And then these periods of checking, these periods of doubting, these periods of just really irrational fears, and but they were so real to me at the time, and that's one of the things that really made me feel defective about myself whenever I was going through that, was because I felt this deep sense of lack of control of my own self, of my own life, of my own body, and it just but part of me knew that this was irrational, but the other part of me didn't. And the other part of me s- kept being the voice that would say, well, what if this was the time that you're not safe, that you're not okay? So it was just really debilitating. It was there was a lot of shame associated with it, a lot of lower self-esteem associated with it. And I didn't know even what was going on, or what's wrong with me. So that's what led me to try to find solutions, because it became so apparent that this is not normal. It would get in the way of my work, it would get in the way of my relationships with family and friends. It would keep me from really being myself. It would keep me from living my full expression and doing what I really wanted to do, because that was always more important, to make sure that I was safe. So, there was definitely a lot of root chakra healing that came about over the years after doing even deeper healing work, healing off those even deeper layers, looking into it even further, and really gaining back those fragments of my soul that were scattered all over the place. So at the time, I was working at a pretty decent job. It had benefits, and and I knew this was a huge issue in my life. So I took advantage of the free counseling sessions that I had through my employer at the time, and I was connected with a very life-changing spiritual therapist, and I really credit so much of my healing to this therapist that was really there and really saw me and really heard me at a time when I didn't think I was worth that. And through the course of that work with this therapist, we uncovered the root of this OCD. And if this is something that you're struggling with or someone you love is struggling with, listen carefully because you might see how the pieces fit in your own life after hearing my story. And that's my hope is that this can kind of at least open up a rabbit hole for you to go down that leads to your healing. And maybe you had a totally different life experience than I did. Of course you did. We're all very unique. We're all have different experiences, different motivations, different everything, right? But the energy we can relate to, we can relate to that core hole in the soul that is feels like a gaping hole. And so once we got into that work, my spiritual therapist helped me really sit with the energy. And this was the first time in my life that I really had the courage to not participate in the rituals and actually sit with that energy and let it be whatever it wanted to be and let it become even bigger than me if it wanted to. And it was when I first saw that this is just energy. This is just consciousness. This is not an instruction to go perform all your rituals. This is not an indication that you're not safe. It's just energy, and there's stories attaching on to that energy. So by this point in my life, I'd already started meditating. I had already started onto my spiritual journey, but I still wasn't to that point where I wasn't quite in tune with the energetics that were coming up for me. It was like I had certain understandings, but I still had so many layers to still learn to even identify that energy. But the first thing that really helped me was signal versus noise. And this is so, so helpful for OCD. So the signal is that something is happening right now that needs your attention, that is a real issue. And at that point, you can take care of it because it's an issue right in front of you. The noise is everything else. So, what I started doing by the recommendation of my wonderful spiritual therapist was I would ask myself in those moments in my life, is this the signal or the noise? At that time, I was on this OCD kick of I was so worried every day when I left my house. Oh my gosh, what if I left something on? What if my house is gonna burn down? So the signal would be my house is actually on fire and I actually need to deal with this right now. The noise is all of those little incessant thoughts. What if your house burns down? What if you didn't leave your coffee pot on and something's next to it and it catches fire? What if you didn't turn the stove off from last night and you just didn't notice it all night? What if you hit someone a mile back and you're going to get arrested and spend the rest of your life in prison? So they're very like jarring thoughts. If you don't really understand what's happening here, it can be very, very scary, and you get pulled into all that noise, and then you don't know which way's up. And that's where I was at the time. So I started really taking a whole different approach and inviting that energy to be and noticing things about that energy and how the energy moved, if the energy had certain edges on it, if the energy was heavy, if it was light, if it was tight, if it was all consuming. But I really committed to doing that. And that's something that I still work with clients about things like this today is, and I still recommend this because it worked so well for me. I put little check marks on sticky notes all over my house. And what those check marks signified was to check in with me and to check in with my energy and my feelings and my emotions. And it would remind me to feel the energy. That's what that check mark signified was feel this energy, be courageous and walk right into it because what keeps OCD patterns alive is us engaging those rituals, engaging those irrational checks of things. And, I see this a lot in my own practice as a hypnotherapist and intuitive is there's a lot of people get this around relationships. If they don't receive a text back, then they have rituals and all of these thoughts thinking this other person hates me, this other person is cheating on me, this other person is in trouble, this other person is uh in danger. So there's all kinds of different themes that can come in with this energy. But the thing to understand is it is at its core just energy that comes through, and it's the same energy every time. We think that it's about different things, it might have different stories attached, but it's essentially the same energy pattern that lives in our body. And that's what happens in life is as we go through life, as we experience things that are very traumatizing, we we store the imprints of that energy in our body, and our body keeps the score, just like that book. The Body Keeps the Score, which is an excellent book, not so much about OCD, but about how those trauma imprints are stored in our body and stuff of that nature. But so it's in our body, and it takes a courageous walking into that energy to heal it. The only way out of it is through it. That energy is stuck and it needs to fully complete through your energy system. So all the rituals do is it kind of just puts a lid on it for a moment, but then it's always going to come back if it's not fully healed through from that original root cause, right? Healing can be such a scary and daunting process also, when you're dealing with all of these intrusive thoughts. That's another thing that came with my OCD was intrusive thoughts, to where I would see these images of things that I was afraid that I was capable of doing. And it terrified me because it was the last thing I wanted to do, but my mind kept giving me these weird scenarios that essentially were just attaching on to that energy. So that was a really uncomfortable process walking into my spiritual hypnotherapist and having him make me sit with that energy. And he really challenged me to do that. And that's what I do for clients now is sometimes I'm not their favorite person at the time, but then they see later how it really helped them because that's how healing works. We have to face that energy and we have to be present with it, and we have to let it go through the different processes that it wants to go through so it can leave. Because if we keep trying to not feel it, then we're just pushing it down even more. It's like we'll push it down for a minute, but it's always going to come back up in the weirdest ways, and we don't even know what's going to attach onto it. But we know that if we don't fully feel it and let the energy move through, that inevitably something will attach to it and it will have a manifestation, and it will keep getting louder and louder and louder until that lesson has been learned, that energy has moved through, and those new reframes have been integrated. So I was really forced to go into that energy. And the way that we did that was in a hypnotic trance state. My hypnotherapist would take me deep into that energy. He would say the worst case scenarios to me, that the very things that I was afraid of happening. And I would be invited to sit with that energy and allow it to expand, allow it to move, allow it to shift. And that came with so many tears. That came with so much darkness, the feeling of darkness. And I know now it wasn't actually darkness, it was just there's two sides of the coin. Life is a balance of the light and the dark. And that was very, very challenging energy to move through. But what that did for me is it allowed me to see it for what it really was, and that this is just energy. This is just consciousness. It's just energy. It's just really close to me, but it's not me. It's just really close to me. So that was a whole process. And part of this also was I had a really wonderful therapist, and he even came to my house at the time and made me leave the house without checking to make sure the doors were locked, without checking to make sure the coffee pot was off. And he sat with me as I experienced the heavy, heavy intensity of that energy. And so we did a lot of that. We did a lot of visualizations of the worst case scenarios happening, because, and it sounds horrible. It's like, why would you want to go into the very thing that you're trying to avoid? And I would ask you, how free do you want to be from it? How free do you want to be? That's what is going to be necessary to healing it, is going into the center of it and learning that it is just energy and that it can't hurt you firsthand. So we did a lot of these visualizations of the worst case scenario. It was very, very painful. But after a lot of this energy started lifting from my energy field, I came to the biggest realization that really changed everything for me. And I don't remember having any symptoms of OCD ever since this day that I really figured this out. And I figured out where it came from, because I don't remember being like that early, early in life where I had to check things. I was weird, I was obsessive, but I wasn't like that. And this came at about age 18 to 19. And the connection that my therapist and I made was, this energy is from my mother. My mother has a lot of challenges in her own energy, and she always did growing up. And I figured out that I, as a child, constantly was always had to check on her emotions. I had to check and make sure that she was okay because as a little kid, everything you depend on in life is through your parents. You depend on them for absolutely everything. You don't see them as flawed, imperfect humans. You see them as this is normal. This is the way life is supposed to be. And with my mother, she always had very, very rocky emotions. And, you never knew which version of her you were going to get. Some days she would be in a great mood, other days she would be violently angry and upset and yelling at us and all of that. Or she would be really sad. And uh, as a child, I always internalized that and made it my fault. When my parents got a divorce, I made that my fault. And I learned through my own healing journey in my 20s that that was absolutely not the case. I was just a little kid and I was doing the best I could, as always. But what I figured out is my OCD is a manifestation of always checking on my mother's emotions. That's where it was born. So once I was able to go in and re educate and reframe, all of that went away because there was no longer anything to entertain that energy. It was allowed. I fully welcomed it. I opened to that energy. And the healing from OCD really changed everything in my whole life because I started seeing the whole world through a whole different lens. I felt more free than I had ever felt. I started moving towards the things that my soul naturally loved, like that Mary Oliver poem, Let the Soft Animal of Your Body Love What It Loves. And I totally identify with that, with this experience. That I began letting the soft animal of my body love what it loved. And it was no longer filtered through this lens of incompleteness, of terror, of panic. And that was huge. So if you or someone you love is facing obsessive compulsive disorder, what I would invite you to do is bring a quality of curiosity to this. And yeah, maybe you should go to get treatment from a licensed therapist, from a healthcare professional. Maybe you want to have a healing arts practitioner, a hypnotherapist help support you in this journey. But I really invite you to bring a quality of curiosity to the energy that you're experiencing. And I invite you to really, in a safe environment, really open to that energy and just notice the characteristics of that energy and notice how that energy is present no matter what the issue is. That energy is there, and that energy is what drives all of these stories. It's not the other way around. A lot of times early on you may think that it's the story that creates the energy, but actually it's the energy that the story attaches onto, and the story wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for that energy. So that energy needs an environment that it can fully move through you at a cellular level. Why would you want to heal OCD? Because it's uncomfortable, because you're not living your full potential if you're burning up so much time and energy involved in these rituals, involved in this panic and terror. And it takes a lot of courage to walk through it, but just know that you're not alone. Find support around you. Find some people that you can talk to in your life about this, because it takes so much power away from it when you just say it out loud, when you write it in a journal. The more light of consciousness that you can shine on that energy, the quicker it's going to heal, the smoother it's going to pass through you, and the more free you're going to become. So, it takes commitment to heal. It takes trial and error. What worked for me may not work for you. Maybe your path is completely different to healing it, and that's beautiful. There's so many different ways, but really, I think the key is just start putting one foot in front of the other. Start really learning yourself, really being willing to be present with yourself and to see things in a different way. It takes open-mindedness. It takes being willing to try a few things that might not work before you find what does work. But if you're committed to healing it, you will absolutely heal it. If you're committed to that healing, it's gonna happen. It's it's just a matter of time. But if this sounds like something like, ooh, I don't want to deal with this, find some help. Find a licensed therapist that can help you with this energy. Find a hypnotherapist that can take you into trance and find the root causes of all this stuff and re-update the subconscious. Find support in your local community. There's OCD support groups, there's OCD support groups online. There's so many resources out there just waiting for you to walk towards them. And another part of this healing journey is you become the observer. You're no longer so pulled by all of this stuff. You're just the observer. Think about it as you're watching a movie. You can just pull yourself out of that movie and you can just see everything going on the screen. And you can see that that's not you, that these are just events that are happening. These are just energies that are passing through. So the more separation you can get from that energy, the more you'll be able to see that energy is not really you. That's not really who you are. And I think the most beautiful thing that happens is you become more you. When you're able to really heal this, you become more you. You become more self-expressed of who you came here to be. And it's always a good reminder that it's later than you think. It's later than you think. We only are in these bodies once, and we could leave this time-space reality at any moment. So you're worth more than squandering all of those hours and days and weeks in this dark pit of OCD, of feeling in this cage that you can't get out of, feeling a prisoner to all of your rituals and your obsessive and intrusive thoughts. You're worth feeling free. You're worth feeling wonderful about the direction your life is heading. You're worth that just by you being in this body on this planet and existing are very, very worthy of all of those things and all of that love. That was my story and some insight on how you might determine how to deal with this in your own life. So don't be a stranger. It really helps us if you subscribe to the channel, if you like the video, if you comment. So thank you so much for your time and your attention and for being here. And you're already on the road to healing it just by watching this and studying things like this. So I hope you have such a blessed day and we will talk soon. Absolutely. Bye.